In this video, we'll be comparing the many movies and TV shows about Elizabeth I. There are a lot of fantastic options to choose from. Keep in mind, this will not include anything from before the 1960s and no docudramas. I also didn't include anything that the main storyline was about Mary, Queen of Scots. I will do a different comparison on her later. Starting with the basics in order of release. Elizabeth R. was a BBC television drama made in 1971. It had 6 90-minute episodes, rated PG-13. Elizabeth was a film made in 1998. It was 123 minutes long, rated R. The Virgin Queen was a BBC miniseries made in 2005. It had 4 one-hour episodes, rated PG. Elizabeth I was a TV series made in 2005. It was 2 episodes, altogether 223 minutes, rated TV mature. Elizabeth the Golden Age was a film made in 2007. It was 114 minutes long, rated PG-13. Becoming Elizabeth was a TV series made in 2022. It was 8 one-hour episodes, rated TV mature. All right, let's get started. Elizabeth R. is a direct sequel to The 6 Wives of Henry VIII. It starts when Edward VI is sick and the succession is in question. It ends with Elizabeth's death. Script. This is my favorite script that encompasses the entire life of Elizabeth. It delves deeply into what happened during her reign, but also before. It is one of the few options that doesn't mainly focus on her relationship with Robert Dudley. Yes, he plays a large role, but it's more about her relationships with everyone around her and the politics of the kingdom. This is not the script for you if you are looking for romance and intrigue. Acting. Glenda Jackson is an impressive Elizabeth. She shows us a true daughter of Henry VIII in her intelligence and sometimes cruel temper. This is not your typical dramatic reenactment. Instead, we get a believable, incredible woman who did so much despite her human faults. The rest of the cast was a little forgettable for me, but it's definitely worth it just for Elizabeth. Production design and costuming. Like The 6 Wives of Henry VIII, this might not have had the largest budget, but they made the most of what they had. The costume designs came straight out of the portraits and were gorgeous. Also, the makeup team did a wonderful job with Elizabeth's makeup, aging her in a very realistic way. Sex and nudity, violence, and gore. There is no sex and nudity, except one instance of man butt. There is a very limited amount of implied violence, but not enough that I would send my nephew out of the room. If what you look forward to the most are sexy scenes and great medieval battles, this is not a good choice for you. Next up, we have Elizabeth. This movie starts when Mary I is still queen, toward the end of her reign. It ends relatively early in Elizabeth's reign when she basically proclaims herself to be the Virgin Queen married only to England. Script. This is a script that heavily leans towards being entertaining over accurate. I have never been so okay with that. This was award-winning levels of engaging entertainment. Of course, Robert Dudley is a large part of the plot, but it also delves into her own personal struggles, the political scheming by ambassadors and the Queen's advisors, all the while never becoming boring or confusing. Acting. Cate Blanchett is a phenomenal actress. She won a ton of awards for her role as Elizabeth and deserved every one of them. Geoffrey Rush as Francis Walsingham was compelling and kinda scary. Joseph Fiennes is my favorite young Robert Dudley. Production design and costuming. The sets had a definite gothic feel to them. The camera angles always made everything look taller. Though not my favorite costuming and design of all the options, it was still nicely done. Sex and nudity, violence and gore. From the get-go, this movie is more sexual and violent than the others. Lots of non-pornographic sex. The very first scene includes some graphic burning of Protestants. Also, look out for the bloody torture. Next we have The Virgin Queen. This TV series starts at the end of Mary I's reign while she's still trying to find an excuse to execute Elizabeth, and ends with Elizabeth's death. Script. This is the one to go with if you're looking for the option with the most Elizabeth and Robert Dudley romance. Basically, the entire first half is dedicated to it, along with Elizabeth's determination not to marry. The second half covers more, including her difficult decision over what to do with Mary Queen of Scots, and fast forwards very quickly through her later years, mostly focusing again on her love life. There are very little politics. Also, very little introduction to any character except for Elizabeth and Dudley. I wish there had been a bit more background on her advisors and what was going on in the country. Acting. By far the standout performance was Elizabeth, played by Anne-Marie Duff. I also thought Robert, the Earl of Essex by Hans Matheson was done well. Production design and costuming. There are one or two outfits worn by Elizabeth that were very pretty and straight from the portraits. But the rest was underwhelming. Even though they filmed at a lot of great sites, I'm sad to say I was not impressed with how it was filmed. It is also guilty of excessive amounts of shaky cam. On the other hand, the aging makeup effects they did for the characters were particularly impressive. Another definite point in its favor is that it had a beautiful soundtrack. I'm tempted to go and buy it. Sex and nudity, violence and gore. Nothing graphic on either front. Okay for the kids. Elizabeth I. This show starts when Elizabeth has already been on the throne for 20 years. Its focus is on her getting older and having no designated heir. It follows the end of her reign until her death. Script. This gives us a look at a more experienced queen, showing us her wit and how she gained the love and respect of her council and the people. The relationship between Elizabeth and Robert Dudley still takes point, except for this time they are more like an old married couple that were never actually allowed to get married. It delves, of course, into all the events of her later life, covering the situation with Mary Queen of Scots, the Spanish Armada invasion, and her relationship with the Earl of Essex. Acting. This is my favorite all-around cast. Brilliant performances by both Helen Mirren as Elizabeth and Jeremy Irons as Robert Dudley. This is the Elizabeth that I think we can most relate to, showing us her vulnerability while still remaining strong for her country. I can't think of a single performance that I didn't enjoy from any of the actors. Production design and costuming. In my opinion, this is the best production design of all of our options. They built a full set of Elizabeth's room, the council, and much more, trying to bring us as close as possible to what it kind of looked like back then. And while it didn't have my favorite costumes, I still think they were very well done. Sex and nudity, violence and gore. This gets a bit bloody. Every time a head was chopped off, instead of the camera dodging at the last minute, we got to watch it in all its gruesome glory. No explicit sex or nudity, but it does have some highly awkward, age-inappropriate romance in the second episode. Next, we're looking at Elizabeth, the Golden Age. This film is a direct sequel to Elizabeth. It takes place during the time when Elizabeth is not sure what to do about Mary Queen of Scots and ends with the battle against the Spanish Armada. Script. I'm sorry to say this was not as engaging as the first movie. It's even more inaccurate. Though you may have noticed by now I'm not always super picky about that. But it jumps around quite a bit between people and plot lines. Robert Dudley is taken out entirely and replaced as a romantic potential by Sir Walter Raleigh. Despite all that, I still enjoyed it. The only thing that really bugged me was that they edited my favorite historical speech Elizabeth gave to her soldiers. Acting. Cate Blanchett is still stunning as Elizabeth. I also enjoyed the performance by Clive Owen as Sir Walter Raleigh. Production design and costuming. This is the only area that I think improved from the last movie. Obviously, a few other people must have thought so too, since it won an Academy Award for Best Costume Design. I only wish they had made Elizabeth look older. They made a big deal about her going through a midlife crisis of sorts, but she really didn't look all that much older from the first film. The visuals were stunning. Definitely worth a watch for some of the great camera work. Sex and nudity, violence and gore. There is a lot less sexual content, probably because Elizabeth is supposed to be so much older. There is still violence and gore, but they toned it down. Lastly, we have Becoming Elizabeth. This series begins with the death of Henry VIII, and season 1 ends with Henry VI still king. It has now been canceled, so we probably will never see a season 2. Script. This show is very specifically a soap opera interpretation of Elizabeth's life prior to becoming queen. We follow not only her, but her siblings, the Seymours, and others. Most of the drama is about what's happening between Thomas Seymour, Catherine Parr, and Elizabeth. Also, everyone building alliances, deciding who trusts who loves who should be sleeping with who, and so on. Don't get me wrong, I am a fan of the Tudors, so I definitely can appreciate a good soapy story. However, so much of this was just wrong to me. I really didn't like how they handled some of these historical characters, making them so out of character. And in general, the script sounded way too modern, adding in a bunch of modern cussing and whatnot. Acting. Elizabeth is played by Alicia von Ripperg. I wish I could have liked this performance more, but the script kind of destroyed it for me. Elizabeth is supposed to be very cunning and careful, even from a young age. In this, she makes a lot of dumb, obvious mistakes and is just not believable as Elizabeth. A standout performance was of the very rarely seen Edward VI by Oliver Zetterstrom. I also enjoyed Mary I by Romola Garai and Jane by Bella Ramsey. I kind of wish they had continued the series just so I could watch more of them. Production design and costuming. This actually had really nice costumes and locations. You could tell they were attempting to be more historically accurate, at least with that. Sex and nudity, violence and gore. There was a battle or two and very gory executions, but it's not the focus. There was a lot of sex. Very inappropriate sex. Trigger warning for those of you who don't want to watch Stepfather with young stepdaughter. Final opinion. Option 1. Elizabeth R. If you only want to watch one continuous story about Elizabeth's entire reign, this is it. It has the least amount of soap opera dramatics, and I think is the most accurate in terms of script and costuming. Option 2. The Virgin Queen. This is your go-to if you want to invest the least amount of time to watch Elizabeth's entire reign, while focusing mainly on Elizabeth's romantic relationships, and is child-friendly. Option 3. If you want a more lengthy marathon of Elizabeth's life and are okay with entertainment over accuracy, then I would watch Becoming Elizabeth, then Elizabeth the Film, then Elizabeth the First. If you prefer, you can switch out Elizabeth the First for Elizabeth the Golden Age, depending on your personal preference. Whew, we got through it. Done. I hope this helped you out or at least amused you. Happy watching.